Well, Donald Trump has pulled off the important win in, of course, New Hampshire after Iowa. But his sole remaining challenger, Nikki Haley, has said she's not going down without a fight. And we just heard her there again. Joining me is Larry Sabato, Director of the University of Virginia Centre for Politics. A very good morning to you, our time. Donald Trump wins New Hampshire, but is it all good news for him?
Well, it's good news in terms of the nomination. He is very, very, very probably going to be the nominee, and I might drop the three verys. I think there's really nothing that Nikki Haley can do at this point. But in our system, candidates don't drop out until the donors tell them to drop out. It's really that simple. As long as money is coming in, you continue your candidacy. When the money stops, you get out. And at this point, her donors actually want her, for the most part, to continue. They want her to go through South Carolina and possibly all the way to Super Tuesday, where you have more than a dozen states voting on the same day, which is March 5th. So this could be a little longer than expected, but it isn't going to determine the outcome, which is preordained now.
It is, unless some courtroom somewhere in the United States, and there's a number of them, intervenes.
There's no way that will happen before late spring or summer, if it happens then. It's true that Trump has 91 felony counts lodged against him in 4 different jurisdictions. But it's also true that in every case, the trials are being stretched out, partly intentionally by Trump and his lawyers. They want to get past the November election. They may be able to do it, at least in 3 of the 4 cases.
There is a subtle irony, though, isn't there, as Donald Trump marches through Iowa and wins in New Hampshire, that Joe Biden and the Democrats are almost rubbing their hands together because they know they're a better chance of beating Donald Trump than they are of Nikki Haley.
Oh, there's no question about that. They won't say that on the record, but they'll certainly tell you that behind the scenes. And look, most of the polling numbers, public and private, show that Haley would dispatch Biden reasonably easily, not by massive numbers, but we don't have landslides anymore in America. They're very, very close contests because we're so partisan and polarized. But Haley would do better against Biden than Trump would. But that's not to say that Trump can't beat him. And most of the good polling results, in my view, show it's essentially an even contest. And if anything, if anybody has a nose ahead right now, it's Donald Trump.
But there were some signs out of New Hampshire in and around independents showing a worrying sign for Donald Trump.
Yes, he's not appealing to the key swing voters, independents. Now, we don't have an enormous number of independents. The polls say we do, but the fact is they're hidden partisans. They're Democrats who say they're independents, they're Republicans who say they're independents, but they almost always vote for their real party. We're down to about 4, 5, 6% of the American electorate that is actually independent and can swing back and forth in elections. And whoever wins a majority of those independents will almost certainly win the election.
Many people looking on wondering, in this country anyway, that I discuss this issue with, how did we get to the point that these two are our two best, regardless of what you think, regardless of whether you're a Democrat or a Republican?
Well, a lot of Americans are asking that question, and it's not a popular matchup. About 70% of Americans prefer another matchup. They would prefer that these two weren't running. But it is what it is. Our system is what it is. Anybody could have run. Anybody could have tried. But the bases of the party, the most liberal Democrats, the most conservative Republicans, they're the ones who nominate the candidates. They're the ones who show up. If the moderates had shown up, they could have nominated 2 different candidates, but they didn't.
What do you think middle America thinks? Because we have compulsory voting here. You don't.
Well, personally, I'm in favor of compulsory voting, but I'm in a small minority. And so people under our system are free to exercise their franchise or not. They will all complain after the election is over, or even before the election is held. But essentially, it's up to the individual. And if individuals feel strongly enough, they'll turn up for their candidate, their party's candidate, or vote for one of the 2 candidates. But if they're disillusioned, then they won't, and it's possible that we'll have a lower than expected turnout in November, though I think it's too early to conclude that.
There's plenty of challenges for the sitting government, isn't there, when you think domestically, internationally, what's happening on the US border, is the money running out for Ukraine, the delicate diplomacy with Israel?
Yes, these are critical issues. And we've reached the point where parties will calculate whether an issue being resolved or a plan being introduced and passed will help them or hurt their opponents. And that becomes more important than whether it's good for the country or good for our international relations. That certainly applies to Ukraine. It applies to some degree now to the Middle East. And there are lots of other issues that fall into that category, including the border, immigration. So we don't solve problems. We just set up problems for the general election.
Finally, Larry, you've been covering, and you're right in the middle of this subject for a long, long time. Have you ever seen US politics quite like this?
Well, 1968 was a bad year. That was the year, you remember, that Bobby Kennedy was assassinated,
Absolutely.
Martin Luther King was assassinated, Lyndon Johnson was forced out because of Vietnam, and we had two arguably subpar candidates. So I think Nixon actually did fairly well in a lot of categories until Watergate. But it was Nixon versus Vice President Humphrey. It wasn't an inspiring campaign, and we had a very unpleasant independent who ended up getting 46 electoral votes, George Wallace, who was a racist.
Yeah, we're going back 55 years. It's interesting. It's interesting. Look, let's do it again. This was great having a chat with you today.
Enjoyed it very much. Thank you.